Hey, GP learners, welcome to this episode of the EGP Learning Podcast, where we're going to be talking about a roundup of the various different conferences that both myself and Andy have been enjoying, participating, and managing as well. And we're going to be talking about the absolutely awesome HTN Digital Primary Care conference that just happened, and you can still get access to all the content for free. You definitely don't want to miss this episode. Jump in, join us as we tech enhance your primary care and learning. Hey, GP learners. So welcome and thank you for joining us. How are we doing there, Andy?
I'm great, Gandhi. It's been good. I've been on holiday for a week, or a holiday of sorts. I've been up in Scarborough with my parents, nephew and sister. So feeling a little bit rested. How are you, Gandhi?
I'm good. I'm good. Enjoy the weather down there? Up there?
It was variable, Gandhi. There was a bit of a rainstorm. Marks and Spencer's roof seemed to collapse, and rain came through the shop. There's videos on YouTube if you care to have a look. But yeah, how's the weather been here in Nottingham?
It's been all good, and thankfully we're enjoying some nice weather, which is helpful. Half my family's gone off to go watch the Test match at Trent Bridge, so hopefully it stays that way. So hopefully we're good day. But we're talking about things that happen at the weekend. So we've got a couple of things we're going to be covering in today's episode. Both me and Andy had the amazing joy of going to the UK Board Games Expo last week, which is what our episode last week was about. And we're going to talk a little bit about that experience as well as recording live. I think that was a useful thing that we learned about. And then covering the HTN Digital Primary Care Conference that we worked in partnership with the HTN newspaper to provide for everybody, which was our free conference, which you can still access all the content and the recordings, and highly recommend that you do that. Links are down in the descriptions and stuff, about basically the future of digital primary care. And I guess, Andy, is the future bright?
Yeah, I think so. It was a really encouraging conference, actually. There was some really good energy there, and I really enjoyed hearing from some of the speakers that we had, and also from some of the sponsors and partners that were there as well. And I think the episode today should give people a sort of flavor and overview of what was discussed at the conference, and we'll pick out some of the key sort of themes, tensions, things looking backwards, things that may be important looking forward. So I think people should find the episode today sort of really beneficial. And then if we've whetted people's appetites, then they can still access the recordings for free via HTN, and I'm sure we'll have the link queued up, ready to go in the show notes at the end.
Absolutely. So shall we kick off actually talking about HTN? Because I think in terms of the more recent thing, obviously that was just happened a few days ago. I mean, we had a couple of headline things at that conference. So first and foremost was Dr. Ursula Montgomery talking about the future of general practice. We were originally hoping to have Dr. Nikki Kanani. Unfortunately, she had to cancel on the morning because of all the vaccination stuff that many of you probably realized came out that day, talking about vaccinating, under 18s and that kind of stuff. So unfortunately, we didn't have Nikki, but we did have Ursula, and it was an amazing session where she talked about basically what general practice has been doing, particularly obviously the vaccination schemes and things, and also how things have changed so drastically in the past year and things. I mean, I was facilitating it, so I was kind of multitasking and stuff. But what did you think, Andy, of the session?
Yeah, I thought it was really good. I mean, I think Ursula did very well. She was pulled in at short notice to present Nikki's slide deck, but you couldn't really tell, and I think she did really well. It's the first time I've seen Ursula. Actually, I think I probably have seen her speak before, but it's the first time I've sort of sat down, known who I'm watching properly, and and listened well to her. I think there were some interesting themes that came through. There was a lot of actually acknowledgement of the great effort that general practice has put in over the past 12, 18, maybe even coming up to 24 months during the COVID-19 pandemic, the great transformation that has happened. And, there was sort of a sense of sort of gratitude from Ursula to general practice and primary care and everybody that works in that area. So I thought that was really, really nice. I thought you did a good job of actually just pressing diplomatically about the tone of some of the letters that had come out of that department from Ursula and Nikki's department at NHS England. I thought that was handled really well. So there was some challenge on that, which I think was really important to make. And it was sort of, I don't want to use the word sort of side steps, but I think the response was really an acknowledgement that that Nikki and Ursula do recognise that primary care is working really, really, really hard, and has worked really hard throughout the pandemic, which it's still interesting to see that is in contrast to to the tone and content of some of the letters, but
Mhm.
it was just really, it's nice to sort of experience that gratitude. Really, did anything come through just while you were moderating that session and fielding the questions
I mean,
come through for you?
we had a lot of questions come through about various aspects. Prior to the event, hands down, the most common question was the one that I asked, which was about basically why does NHSE not seem to like general practice right now? I mean, not like is not actually the word. I think hate was the word that came up the most in the questions. But I kind of felt that was a bit of a strong tone, shall we say? But and as you said, Ursula did answer the question. I think it's a hard question to answer because I appreciate it may not be down to the individuals that have control over the actions of the organisation. And I think many people across general practice do feel that NHSE have done some positive stuff at times, and they've unfortunately also done some really negatively perceived actions, particularly for general practice. And we've talked about them. We've not shied away from talking about those topics in the past, and particularly obviously the two letters that came out, one last September and one earlier this year. And I think kudos to Ursula tried to tackle the question and stuff, as well as some other aspects. There's lots of stuff about digital, healthcare, and in particular, the system support and how can we provide access based on want in some ways seem to come through a little bit as well, because that seems to be the direction of travel increasingly, and particularly politically from the organisations like NHSE and that kind of thing. And that's a real challenge to deal with. Admittedly, a lot of the tech stuff was actually tackled more by Dr. Minal Bakhai, which was our second keynote speaker. And that I think really did go down interestingly. Minal had prepared some really interesting stuff for people to listen to, and definitely the comments were really engaged in terms of the topic and talking about obviously the challenges that digital presents and the solutions it offers as well. I mean, what were your thoughts on the session?
Yeah, I thought something that came through really strongly in Minal's session was like a focus on the user experience and actually on user interface as well. I thought that she focused more than I was expecting on that aspect of things,
Mhm.
and making sure that practice websites and symptom checker type technology. She showed a few comparisons between different technologies, different
Mhm.
solutions in terms of online consultations, for example, just demonstrating that some, you can be finished within a few clicks, and some you have an almost never-ending form to fill
Yeah,
in. And
I
she
remember
was,
that slide actually, yeah, so
yeah,
one was 4 clicks and one was 78 clicks.
yes, and she was just sort of reflecting on that and highlighting that she feels that there should be more focus on the user experience and the user interface. I think that's
Mhm,
really good because you need systems that are that people want to use, that people can use, that people can use effectively. And of course, she focused on the patient side of things, but some of the systems designed for GPs and practice staff to use on the
mhm,
back end can be really, really click heavy in the user interface and the
mhm.
user experience that, and it can be really poor as well, which can be a barrier to uptake and effective use of these
Yep.
technologies. So I thought it was really interesting that she's
Mhm,
beginning to focus on that aspect. I thought it was great. She talked about procurement guidelines and guidance and
mhm.
strengthening
Yep.
IT procurement processes within general practice. For all sorts of reasons, procurement can go wrong, and there's all sorts of instances of things being purchased. One of the speakers talked about, I think he was chief information officer for an area, and he wasn't even aware that a product had been
Yep.
procured in his area, and it had just sat on the shelf and not been used following, having had a reasonable amount of money spent on it in a procurement decision.
Mhm,
So it was really, I think, important that Minal sort of shining a light on the ability of the NHS to procure effectively and procure the
mhm,
products that patients want, and also that staff and clinicians want as well, that they
mhm.
will use. And I think sometimes GPs and GP staff are a forgotten stakeholder group
Yep.
in procurement decisions, and there can be, and rightly so, a lot of focus on is this what patients want and what patients use. But if then practice staff can also choose to use something or not, it is discretionary at that level as well. So
Mhm.
that group really needs to be engaged with, and engaged with better than it is in some areas going forward. So yeah,
Absolutely.
great to focus on procurement. And anything along that aspect that that you thought was interesting, Gandhi, or anything else?
Yeah, so I guess that harken back to our episode that we did about, we gave people a budget and how much of that you're going to spend on tech and that kind of stuff. And then we even used that as an example in the session with Minal to say, if you had X amount of money, how are you going to spend it and how are you going to use it effectively? You're right, Osman, who led the session on GPDPR. So if you wanted a GPDPR update that is live and fresh and current, highly recommend you go check out Dr. Osman Bhatti's session. He talks about what's changed with GPDPR, the liabilities for practices. He talks about the liabilities in terms of what NHSD and all the other organizations need to do. And a lot of the evidence, in fact, he talked about the Which survey that came out that day that showed the impact of what people are aware and aren't aware about GPDPR and stuff. So absolutely go check out that session. I don't think we can do it justice in terms of talking about it here. Um, but I think, overall, one of the main things I really enjoyed about Minal's session is that being someone that's really pro tech, because I know that she is, she works for NHSE and I, trying to push forward the primary digital care transformation prospects and stuff. But the key part was that she also recognized that there are times when digital just doesn't work effectively. It's not all praise and just do it and that kind of stuff. It was very much a sensible and rounded look at the whole concept. So making that journey for the patient really effective, making that experience for the practice staff suitable. She talked about the new pharmacy scheme about minor illnesses and stuff and making it so that actually a referral to the pharmacy should happen in basically 1 or 2 clicks. It shouldn't be a prolonged, complicated process because actually, if the process to refer a patient to a pharmacy for minor illness thing takes more than 5 minutes, to be honest, you could have dealt with it in 5 minutes. It's quicker to deal with it as a practice, and that doesn't change the workload for either elements and stuff, and it doesn't use the resources that are available then as a result of it. So that process has to be really, really quick, otherwise practices aren't going to do it. It was just that sensible perspective, and I think if you want a really good opportunity to understand what's potentially coming as well for primary care, definitely go check out that session in detail. It was only about 40 minutes long, which, as usual, we give you that little hint of, stick it on 1.2, 1.3 speed and you get through a little bit quicker. But really good session, really good content. And the questions definitely challenging and interesting from there as well.
Mm. So, Gandhi, something else that really struck me about the conference,
Mhm.
and this is something I've been reflecting on really throughout the pandemic, is that when we talk about technology, it's important not to forget older technology as
Mhm.
well. Telephones.
Telephony, yeah.
Telephones.
Yeah.
The Dog and Bone was a big sort of part of the conference as well, and it's been a big part of the pandemic response, and probably the most important tool that we've been using
Mhm.
over the last 12-18 months has been telephones and telephone consultations and people contacting us via the telephone rather than walking into the practice, and that's put a lot of strain on some practices' telephone systems, and some telephone systems just haven't been able to cope. We're in a
Mhm.
new building, built in 2012, and actually our telephone system sometimes doesn't work
Yep.
right because of the strains placed upon it. You perhaps experienced something else
Mm.
at your lift building as well. So it was just really interesting that was part of the conference, and one of the main partners, Exxon, do sort of a voice over IP telephone system that has lots of useful and interesting features. There'll be other providers out there as well, but just that focus on when you're procuring things, like make sure you've got the basics right as well, the basic technology,
Absolutely.
like telephones and websites as well. I thought Practice 365 did a from is it Iatro? I always forget their parent
Aetro,
company.
yes. Massive
Aatro.
fan of Aetro's work. I
Yeah.
think, their journey of trying to improve the user IX of, the patient journey, improving the way that they support practices, managing something simple as a website, which we really don't do very well in general practice. Let's be clear on that. Very few practices, I think, focus on their engagement from a digital perspective, and that can be websites, social media, that kind of stuff. I think many more starting to do, and we saw the benefits of doing that through the pandemic with crowdsourcing and information sharing and things. But their work, I think, is really going to be pivotal for many practices to understand how to better flow with patients. And both of those companies, Exxon and Iatro, have some really cool pieces of things. that, to be honest, I think generally speaking will save practice stress and time if they really do look at them properly and things. So yeah, definitely. Those were two that definitely jumped out in my mind in terms of how they can be effective. Although having said that, I was facilitating both those sessions, so yeah, that kind of helped.
Yeah, they were great. And the Practice 365, website solution seems really, really sensitively designed. They seem
Mm.
to know what you need as a GP practice, as opposed to a
Mhm.
shopfront website, or a club website or something like that. So that was really, really good. And I always reflect, because we look at our website stats.
Mhm.
Loads of hits. It's surprising, when people want to interact with the practice, even looking at the
Mhm.
telephone number, for example, how many people go to the website first. So I think it's a really sort of underappreciated
Yeah.
and old to some extent technology that still needs focus on it,
Mhm.
and still a lot of mileage can be got out of that by improving it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other themes or reflections on the conference, Gandhi?
Well, I guess the other two to talk about as well was one of the key providers that helped out with the conference was C-Cube, talking about the digitization of records. And I guess the reason why I mentioned that recently on a lot of the GP groups in the past couple of days, it's been a real topic for discussion, because I think one of the key things once you've digitized your records is the fact the amount of space it can free up in your practice, in terms of usable estates, because you're not having to store the physical records, which patients are might actually be surprised how much space is actually taken up in a general practice area just to store their old medical records, which we are required to do. But the physical copies can take up a huge amount of space. I know some practices where they have whole rooms dedicated just to storing the practice notes. Or, in our practice area, I've worked out I could fit probably at least about 6 or 7, people in the same space that we store our medical records in, if not more potentially. Um, so I think C-Cube's ideas of trying to digitize records, and I know there's the national scheme looking at trying to do this to support practices. I know there's other options and stuff, absolutely, but the whole concept of digitizing your records, I think, is something that really does need to be pushed really hard, because then that will help solve one of the biggest challenges facing general practice, which is our estates issue.
Gandhi, I wasn't in that session. So
Mhm.
at my practice, we're sort of impatiently waiting for the national sort of scheme to get
Mm.
going and get round to us. So what are they offering? Is this something that can get us ahead of the national scheme?
So
What's the offer
I mean,
there? Without asking out of personal interest.
yeah, so I think they talked about the route and the options, and there's, like I said, there's various providers that can offer this, and I think all the solutions allow for digitization of records. I think there's things you need to think about. So there's obviously the initial cost, which it should be covered by the national scheme, because that is a cost to bear in mind. But then there's the other aspects of how do you access those notes? Is it something that's integrated within your clinical system? Is it something that's just PDF viewer style, or is it something that you have to have continued access to? So I know one of the other solutions some practices have looked at is storage off-site for physical records. But then the issues you have with those is that when you do actually need the physical records, it's the transfer access cost that you have to pay, which often can be quite significant.
Yeah, we looked into that. There's sort of as you say, there's sort of an access cost each time you want to
Mhm.
retrieve one of the records, and then there's often like some fairly punitive's not the right word, but the exit fees for ending the agreement and getting
Mhm.
all the records back seem disproportionately expensive
Mhm.
as well. I'm sure those companies have to, control their costs and the business risk
Yeah.
they have, in some way. But it was a bit of a disincentive from us storing records off site. We recently had a flood, so we moved all the records temporarily, you see, and then we thought, wow, we've got actually quite a lot of space here that the records used to take up. Why don't we put in some hot desks and maybe some,
Mhm.
some soundproof booths, noise cancelling headphones, put some of the primary care network
Mhm.
staff who are doing like non-face-to-face contact work there with not requiring physical examination. So we
Mhm.
explored never bringing the notes back into practice, but for the reasons we just mentioned, the costs just didn't quite stack up. So they're now back in the office, unfortunately, and we're waiting for the
Ye
national scheme.
Well, like I said, I think that kind of modeling, that looking at those kind of options of creating space, smarter spaces in general practice, I think is absolutely what practices need to consider about doing once they've started to open up the estates that they hopefully will get from digitizing their records and things. And I guess the other thing I'm keen to talk about is obviously the other two providers that came to the conference as well. So we had Eva Healthcare talking about their new solution for vaccinations, which I think many practices really need to consider looking at, particularly with phase 3 vaccinations for COVID and for the flu vaccination stuff. It's an awesome solution. It works so easily, it's slick, and it focuses on that UIX thing that we keep talking about. That was a theme throughout the conference. That it's basically it does what Pinnacle does, which everybody uses, but it's just so much easier, so much easier. And it just does the job as you want it to. Yeah, I'm a big fan of their product, to be honest, and keen to see that being used more effectively. I think it will save so many people time and effort. And I know there are some people out there that feel that Pinnacle is something they want to stick with because it's that whole cognitive load of having to learn a new system. But even that they've recognised that they've actually made it work the same that Pinnacle does. It just looks so much better and it functions so much easier because you don't have to worry about all the weird kind of coding. Like, that weird word you have to remember, otherwise you can't use Pinnacle. It doesn't require that. It requires a sensible sign-in solution, not some weird, super crazy thing that if you ever forget it, you can never access it again. Seriously.
So yeah, and Gandhi, you know what wasn't mentioned there at all was artificial intelligence, which
True.
I was quite pleased actually. I think I predicted that artificial intelligence is going into the trough of disillusionment for a year or two before it emerges and actually becomes useful again. But it was quite nice not to be talking about that. And one of the companies we used to talk about when we talked about artificial intelligence was Babylon Health, and we used to talk about them quite a lot. We don't talk about them now, and obviously going away from what we'd scripted for the episode, Gandhi. But has some of their competitive edge been blunted by the more widespread adoption of e-consultation tools and video consultations where they are of benefit to the patient by general practice at large? Do you think that's potentially neutralized some of what would have been perceived as competitive advantages for them?
Practices on par with what they were offering, and there have been, I think, from memory serves me right, there have been challenges that Babylon been facing from a funding perspective that happened during the pandemic because of stuff that happened. If I remember, I can't remember the exact story, so apologies if I've got it wrong on things. But yeah, their model has, well, it's more, everybody else's model has become more aligned to what they were offering, and therefore the benefit that they offered over normal kind of routine practice is no longer as significant. I'm not going to say it's not there because it's still a different type of service, and they have, I think, a much more developed service when it comes to aspects of that. So they've been doing it for longer. They know the lessons of how to do, particularly video consultations, easily, and can switch on a button effectively and have an access to a workforce that can support whatever they need to do at that point to some degree. But I think, like you say, there's some aspects of the stuff that they've been doing that is no longer unique to them. It's not a USP. So that's the whole thing about USPs. Once they're no longer there, it makes everybody else a bit more different, doesn't it?
Yeah, the protective moat, as they say, might not have been as deep as some people thought. And I think actually, bog standard, kind of normal, typical general practice, it's actually a much stronger beast now. And for example, I think where Babylon struggled was like the conversion of a video consultation to a face-to-face interaction with physical examination, for example. Whereas I do that all the time now. I go from telephone to physical examination, or from telephone to video to physical examination a few minutes or hours later in the practice. Which is actually a really fantastic service, and really in some aspects, outcompetes what the likes of Babylon are capable for. So yeah, sorry for deviating from the script there, Gandhi, but it just struck me that AI and sort of the likes of Babylon and those sorts of models we're not really talking about them so much at the moment. I'm sure they'll rise again in the future, but just interesting.
It'll be interesting to see what comes out as the next big thing, and that's one of the questions we did actually ask everybody. And so we had our panel discussion at the end, and there was that question of what is the next big thing. I don't think anybody actually knows, to be honest. But what I have the feeling of is that it's very much about improving UIX is massively on there, improving workflows for practices and for patients as well. So, making it so that everything isn't 20,000 clicks or something like that in particular to do something that should really be functionally easy to do. I know we keep talking about interoperability. That was the big thing, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Interoperability that keeps coming through, that how do we make that more sensible and fixed? And I think, there are stuff that has happened from NHSX and, the system providers like TPP, who are also one of the provider sponsors and stuff of the event, and did an amazing session that I know lots of people enjoyed. Um, but, how they kind of work together with all the other providers and, more importantly, streamline a lot of that. I know our work that we've been doing with System One in particular has been really beneficial in terms of the System One Facebook user group and the conferences we've had. I think that's been really hopefully quite helpful. But it doesn't mean there isn't more that can be done. Be interested to see how that develops in the future.
Yeah, definitely. I wonder when TPP are going to have a user interface upgrade of System One. I love System One, but it's very Windows XP kind of appearance. Sorry, everyone at System One, but it's usable, so that's good. Yeah. So, and then I suppose the final question that we always like to ask guests was how would you spend £100 million on digital primary care going forwards? What did you make of some of the answers that came through there, Gandhi?
It was interesting because I made the extra proviso that you can't use one of the answers already given. So I think that added a bit more challenge as we went through. But, there's some really interesting answers about that, in terms of absolutely looking at the processes, in terms of how people are doing it, looking at, improving the experience for clinicians, fixing, challenges within the NHS itself, about how people approach it and stuff. And then, yeah, mine I chucked in, which was a random one at the end, which was a single sign-on, which I still think will make so much of a difference to everybody across the whole NHS if they finally figure out how to improve, sign-on access for clinicians, and we don't have to have about 50,000 usernames and passwords to do the simplest thing.
Yeah, it's always a good question. Always difficult to to answer that one as well. I know I was keen to, and there are lots of problems with this, but to just get the money to general practice and primary care networks, and let them, obviously with the proviso that you want them to spend it well. They have to spend it on digital. You want to put measures in place to avoid wastage of the money, but let them spend it on digital problems that their patients need and that they need as clinicians to enable them to do a better job, which I think is a neglected area of digital health. Actually, there is a lot of focus on the patient experience. I think there could be a lot more focus on making our workforce more effective by augmenting what they do with digital tools. Algorithms to support the filing of pathology, for example. I know people are doing work in this space, but there's not as much focus on that area as I think they could be. Filing of letters, helping people make sense of results, information in letters, the information in front of them with the consultation. So I think we could spend a lot more on that. But my answer to the £100 million question was let GPs decide and let market forces deliver the innovation. If there's an injection of money there that people could compete for, then I think that we have a really good ecosystem of digital health providers in the UK, big and small. And I think we might get some really unexpected positive results if we sort of spend the money and stand back. That's the free marketeer in me, perhaps. But that's what led to the production of your TPPs and your EMISs and all the others. They were just created to meet a need that general practice had to do its job more effectively. And because each individual GP or groups of GPs have the ability to choose what will work best for them, we ended up with some world-class products and companies just coming out of that competitive environment. So I think trusting that going forwards, maybe.
Fingers crossed. Anyway. So, I mean, we talked about the conference, and again, if people do want to check out any of the content from it, it's all available for free. Head over to HTN, the website. The links will be down in the description and stuff. And in particular, you'll be able to access all the video content, and there's loads of write-ups as well. So if you don't want to sit through a whole video and stuff, they've actually also, HTN have already produced loads of articles around the conference and stuff. So just simply go to their website, and they will be able to give you access to basically all that information, which I think, amazing value is an understatement because it's free. But in terms of the experience as well for the conference, I think that was also quite awesome and stuff. So if people do want the link, I will just stick it on right now. Here we go. So there you go, htn.co.uk/htn-videos, and that will take you straight through to all the content. And then if you click on the individual ones, I'll also get you access to the main page and then the articles. In particular, the one from Minal, and there's a really good write-up of basically everything we talked about, which you can read in about 5 minutes or so. So definitely check that out. But it wasn't the only conference we went to, was it, Andy? We did also happen to jump into the UK Games Expo last weekend.
Oh yes, that's a really big board games
Mhm.
expo. It runs annually, and well, it probably didn't run in 2020, one imagines,
No, it didn't.
but it was back for 2021
Mhm.
with. That was my first experience of being out and about in a really big event in the sort of hesitate to say post-COVID. It's not post-COVID, but in the post-lockdown world that we
Mhm.
now live in, and it was a fun experience. How did you find things?
Yeah, I had a great time. A whole day dedicated to us just looking at new board games, playing new board games, and just having the opportunity to. Yeah, I got my board game fix. Let's put it that way. It was great fun. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was good. Yeah, it was fantastic, and we had a chance to practice broadcasting from the field, which some of
Yeah.
you may have seen last Saturday morning.
Mm.
Debatable how well that went, but it was really an experiment for us. We're both going to the general practice, the RCGP conference later in the year, and intend to do some sort of recording, broadcasting
Mhm.
from there. So it was a little bit of an experiment for us, which I think taught us a few lessons. Would you say, Gandhi?
Yeah, so I think, worth us giving a slight apology to everybody in terms of the quality of the video that came through from last week. We realized that was down to the data stream and stuff, and we thought it was better from our perspective, a little better than it actually ended up being when you see the outcome. But yeah, I think we've learned that it's better for us to record and upload rather than to go live, unfortunately, because it did impact the quality due to the internet provision that we had. But you live and learn. It's how you fix things, isn't it? So we know how to do it better for next time. And next time we'll be at the RCGP annual conference, where both myself and Andy will be there, not only to enjoy the conference but also to present at the conference. So absolutely, if you're coming along, come and say hi. We'll be there for all 3 days. Heading up on Wednesday and stuff. And yeah, looking forward to it because it'll be the first time to go back to conference, obviously since COVID happened, and the opportunity to catch up, hopefully, some friends and colleagues from around the world in a face-to-face environment. You should see how they manage it because obviously RCGP conference is pretty big. I think 3,000 odd GPs in one place. You should
Yeah,
see whether they
absolutely.
limit the numbers or what that looks like when we get to October.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, it would. It's quite high profile, isn't it? If there was some
Mhm.
sort of super spreader, RCGP variant that emerged and took down primary care after the
Mhm.
conference, that would be pretty sad. So, be interested to see what measures they've got in place.
Absolutely. So, we've covered loads of content today in terms of what we've been up to for the past week or so, and we've got loads of cool stuff planned for you as well coming up in the next few weeks. And as ever, if there's new stuff that comes out in terms of documents and that kind of stuff, I'm sure we'll be covering them as they come along. We haven't covered the more recent stuff that came out Wednesday because it seems to be more along the lines of continuing with vaccinations and things. But absolutely, the future is interesting. Many people are still looking at obviously phase 3 COVID vaccinations and flu clinics, which if you want to check out our episode from the other week, feel free to do so. That talks a lot about the potential of challenges and issues with setting up and stuff. And if you want that, video is coming up right here, hopefully right now. And as always, EGP learners, we're here to continue to try and help tech enhance your primary care and learning. And we will catch you in the next episode. See you later.